My name is Rebecca Reeder, and I'm the National Finals Coordinator. And I will tell you that I'm honored to have the opportunity tonight to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. John Tinker. I also think it's awesome to be in a room with kids who think John Tinker's a rock star. I think that's really neat. The case in which Mr. Tinker was the first named petitioner was heard by the Supreme Court in the year I graduated high school. I was your age. The Tinker versus Des Moines Public School District helped change student life in schools across the country. I saw that firsthand. In the court's 1969 majority decision, Justice Abe Fortas famously declared, it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. Many years later, as a classroom teacher, I taught Tinker to elementary students. They were moved and motivated to learn that young people could have power. Yes, you do. In the 50 years since the Supreme Court decision, John has remained a committed Peace Corps activist. Along the way, he's done a variety of work. He's been a deckhand on a shrimp boat, a city bus driver, a database programmer, an information system architect, and a radio and electronics engineer. Most recently, John has built a nonprofit community radio station in Fayetteville, Missouri, which he and his wife, Patricia, operate with the help of volunteers from the community. John is also president of the John F. Tinker Foundation, whose mission is to help educate students, teachers, and school administrators regarding the First Amendment rights of students, and to encourage the discussion of controversial issues across political boundaries. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome John F. Tinker.
Give me that sign, will you? We just took a whole bunch of pictures, right? So I want to take a picture, maybe a couple pictures. Can I get a peace sign from? Thank you. I have a 14-year-old son at home and an 18-year-old daughter at college, and I'm going to wow them with those photos, so thank you very much. It is indeed an honor to be here tonight, and I have to thank the We the People project of the Center for Civic Education, and specifically Rebecca Reeder, who you just met, and Robert Lemming. Thank you very much for inviting me and bringing me here. I don't have a lot of time tonight, and I've been thinking for a long time what I should say to this collected group of very astute, bright, inspired, and inspiring young people today, because truly you are the future. I know you've heard that, and I know it's a cliche, but I know that it's true. And you all are the future of this country. As we go forward into the 21st century, with all of the problems that we have in the world today, and I know that you're aware of them, well, you're going to be solving them, I hope. We all hope. And tonight, just meeting so many of you, it's given me a great deal of confidence that that we can be optimistic, that there might be solutions out there, and that you all are going to help to find them. Now, I know you all are familiar with Tinker v. Des Moines, and so I'm not going to, thank you. So I don't want to run you through what I would normally tell an audience of people who are not so familiar with the case, but I would like to back up quite a few years and tell you some of how that came to happen. My father was a pacifist. He was a Methodist minister. He got one of his early charges was in a church in a small town of Wapello, Iowa, and he wasn't sure how he was going to be received as a pacifist in Wapello, Iowa. But as it turned out, Wapello, Iowa was populated by a number of people who had left Germany, who had fled the Prussian militarism that eventually led to World War I, was a big component of World War I. And he was welcomed into that community. The next town that he went to was a small town called Atlantic, Iowa. And it had a population of about 4,000 people, one Methodist church, and one swimming pool, and one black family. In the whole town, there was one black family, and the kids were not permitted to swim in the public swimming pool. And this was actually a violation of Iowa law. Iowa had a law of public accommodations law dating back to the 19th century. Iowa was very progressive when it came to race relations, at least back then. But by the early 1950s, I was born in 1950, and I was 4 years old in Atlantic, Iowa. My dad was the minister at the Methodist Church, and he found out that the black kids in town were not permitted to use the public swimming pool. And so he brought this matter up to the town council, and it was the law. They had to permit it. But the congregation in his church did not appreciate that he had made this a public issue in the town, and he considered that my father was divisive of the community, and so they didn't renew his contract at the church. So we moved to Des Moines, Iowa, and my mother decided that her children needed to have some black friends, and so she made friends with civil rights leaders in Des Moines, including a woman named Edna Griffin, who had won an Iowa Supreme Court case in 1948, desegregating the lunch counter at the Katz drugstore in Des Moines. Her son Stanley became my best friend. It's like, that's a cliche to say, yeah, some of my best friends are black. Well, my best friend was black. So I grew up with the N-word and all kinds of insults thrown at me for being friends with black people. There were other black kids that were part of our family friendship circle, and we invited them to come to church with us. If you're a preacher's kid, you have to go to church every Sunday. You have to shine your shoes. So anyway, we went to church. We invited our friends to church with us. And that church also did not appreciate having black people in the congregation. And so they also didn't re-employ our dad. And so a Quaker organization called the American Friends Service Committee, let me know if you've ever heard of them. Thank you. They're a wonderful organization. They're the Quaker service organization. They were created back following World War I, and they did a considerable amount of relief work in Europe after World War I, and the organization actually won the Nobel Prize for doing that. So our father became the Secretary for Peace Education for the American Friends Service Committee. That was in 1962. Now, looking at our history, we'll look at the history of the Vietnam War. The French lost in 1954. There were supposed to be elections in 1956. The United States didn't think those elections were a good idea because they knew that Ho Chi Minh was going to win by a landslide in Vietnam. And so we colluded with the Diem regime in South Vietnam to prevent those elections. And we began the engagement in Vietnam, the military engagement, ultimately leading to 500,000 troops, approximately, is that correct, that were in Vietnam. So by 1965, there was an operation called Rolling Thunder. And this was the bombing of Vietnam by the B-52 aircraft. This is the heavy bomber in the U.S. arsenal. And we were bombing lots of things. We were bombing industry in North Vietnam, but we were also bombing thatched roofs and a peasant population. And that affected us. We knew about this. And it really affected us strongly. We thought this was a great moral lapse on the part of our country, and we didn't know what to do about it. And so in the end of 1965, there was the first large anti-war demonstration in Washington. Depending on who you believe, there were between 25,000 and 50,000 people there. There were two buses that went from Iowa. A coalition of peace groups in Iowa sent these two buses, and I asked my parents if I could go along on that trip, and so I did. And on the way back from that demonstration, there was a discussion on the bus, what could we do to continue to protest the U.S. involvement in the war and to express our dissent regarding the war. And one of the people on the bus said he had heard that people were going to wear black armbands to protest the war. Well, what is a black armband? I mean, it's just a piece of black cloth on your arm, and it's a traditional symbol of mourning. I don't know if you have ever watched a show called The Rifleman. It was an old Western that we grew up with. One day on this show, there's a guy just walking across the street. He's not part of the plot, nothing, but he has a black armband on. And I'm thinking, wow, there's a black armband right there. But it was a traditional symbol. When one of your loved ones had died, you would wear a black piece of cloth just to let your friends and neighbors know that you were sad about this. So we decided to wear the black piece of cloth to express our sadness for the deaths on both sides of the war. And we felt sad. We felt sad for the U.S. service people that were dying in Vietnam, and we felt sad for the Vietnamese that were dying also. And we also were encouraging the adoption of Robert Kennedy's idea for a truce in Vietnam that Christmas. So anyway, that's why we got that's what we got kicked out for. We got suspended from school for wearing this black piece of cloth. I'm not going to go on with that story because you know so many of you already know the story. It would be kind of pointless for me to repeat it here, but I would like to, in just a few minutes that I have, I'd like to discuss what it means to have a value system. Because here, you all represent a value system. The study of civic education and civics, that is a value system. And the value that it represents is the value of living together peacefully, basically. And that's what a city is. And that's what the word civics comes from, is the word city. And when people, human beings, began to live together in cities, then they had to organize their thoughts differently, how they treat each other, how they respect each other, how they establish justice, and things like that. And what we're dealing with the American experiment, and don't forget, it is an experiment, and sometimes we get perilously close to the edge of that experiment. The question to America is, can we make it work? Can we make a democratic system of government work? And you all and the civics program, this whole program is about making it work. And it's not really an experiment if you don't give it your best shot. And that's what's so endearing to me in this group of young people, is that you're giving it your best shot. And that's really what we need. And back to values a second. I knew a man once, and he was an anti-war guy, and he was wealthy, and he was invested in military industry. And I said, well, how do you square that? And he said, well, sometimes it's not best to put your investment where your values are. And I thought about that a long time. And I finally concluded that no, where you put your investment tells us what your values are. Those are your values. And so when I see this group of students and teachers and administrators putting their investment in democracy, in making democracy work, I think your values are just exactly in the right place. And so, thank you. I'm pretty much going to leave it at that. I'm going to say we do have a new foundation. It bears my name. It was put together by a professor of educational leadership at the University of Wisconsin. And I'm honored that it's named after me. And it's a little bit humbling and embarrassing even sometimes to try to carry that. But anyway, if any of you would be interested in helping us, please get in touch with us, because we have a website, could really use some help. And we have programs that are planned. We have one that we're just getting together right now for the Bay Area. And if we get support, we're gonna try to put them together all over the country. And we're interested, obviously, in educating around student rights and teachers. Remember, not just students, but teachers don't shed their constitutional rights either in the school. But also, we're interested in trying to encourage civic discourse and civil discourse, because we know that the polarization in this country is really reaching very distressing levels. And if you've ever tried to talk to somebody who's on the other side of the fence on a political argument, and if you've ever noticed that you may disagree with people as people, but you still you find that they're a human being and you kind of like them anyway, I've found that a lot. I have a lot of friends that I disagree with over political issues, but that are very human people. And we're trying to reach across that political divide and find the humanity that unites us and do the e pluribus unum thing, united again. So with that, I'm going to call it quits, and please do stay in touch if you're interested in this, and I have a feeling that a number of you are. So thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.